If you work in the sign industry making tactile signs for businesses, one of the most time-consuming parts of laying out large quantities of signs is adjusting the character spacing, or kerning, to be ADA compliant. So when laying out sign text, there are a few basic rules that must be followed. The raised copy or tactile text must be between 5/8 and 2 inches tall, that's easy enough, and the character spacing must have 1/8 inch minimum between adjacent characters. That's where things get tricky. If you are using CorelDraw, there is no built-in way of achieving text that is ADA compliant. There are a few different ways of doing this manually. Probably the most time-consuming and inefficient way to proper ADA kerning is by moving each character's control node individually. You would create a dot that is 1/8 inch in diameter. I have one right here, 1/8 inch. And then you would use that as a measuring tool while you make adjustments to the control nodes. So you would go into the shape tool, grab a node like that, and then you can slide the character side to side this way until you have enough room in between to allow for that 1/8 inch minimum. But as you can see, as I adjust each letter this way, I change the distance between the next adjacent letter, so I have to go and make doubly sure that that one is now correct. Just one character at a time here, holding down the control key to constrain the movement to side. If I let go of that, then I have to deal with moving things up and down, which I don't want, so I'll just constrain that with the control key. Get that to 1/8 inch minimum, and then move on to the next one. Now if I zoom out a little bit and use my control nodes, I can move a whole set of characters at once. Moving those in all together, you can see them sliding until I change the distance there. Move this one. Grab all of these. But as you can see, quite tedious and time-consuming. Now, CorelDraw does have built-in commands for increasing and decreasing individual letter kerning. However, these commands are not immediately accessible. You need to assign the commands to a couple of shortcut key combinations that you can use while editing the text. So you would go up here to Customization, Commands, search for Kern, and then you have these two commands. Decrease I have assigned to the shortcut key of Alt left arrow. Increase is set to Alt right arrow. So if I go back out to our letters, double click into the text for editing, then I can use Alt left arrow to decrease, Alt right arrow to increase, and then I can just release the Alt key and navigate around to different characters to move the next one in the set. And then step out and go to my measuring tool to make sure that everything is looking good, not too tight. So that's another way of manually adjusting the character kerning. So now along comes KernADA, or KernADA. This is a macro tool that I've developed for CorelDraw, which will perform ADA compliant letter kerning to all selected text objects. It only works with artistic text and will not work with text that is in a paragraph box. So you can back out here, select all of this text, doesn't matter if there's other objects selected in the group at the same time, and then just using the default settings of proportionate letter spacing and proportionate word spacing, hit the Kern button, and it will make sure that everything is adjusted just right. So now I do have it set to allow for a little bit of extra space in between the letters. You can see right here it's not going down through the minimum of 0.125, it's adjusting proportionately to the height of the characters at 0.188. If we wanted to, we could bump that down to the minimum of 0.125 and kern that again. And if we double check that, we can see that all of these letters are going to be pretty darn close to 1/8 inch apart at their closest point. Even these guys right down here. They will not be less than 1/8 inch, but the way they do that adjustment is the same way that the manual kerning was done, using the increase and decrease letter kerning commands like that. Those adjustment steps are done incrementally proportionate to the size of the characters. So the larger the characters, the larger the jump is going to be, but it's still going to be proportionate to the height of the characters. But you can see that if we go and get a little bit closer to these characters and bump that in one more step, we'll bump this one in one more step and then grab our measuring tool, we should be a little bit less than what is needed to be ADA compliant. So it's very, very tight. You can see there's not quite enough to meet that 1/8 inch minimum if you're going for that absolute smallest amount. This one right here also. Make that one adjustment, bump that out one step, and there we have that 1/8 inch minimum. So the macro is using that same adjustment movement between the letters. That's how it gets the kerning done. Now here's a bunch of example text that is in a variety of different sizes and different fonts down here. If we check this out at the top, we see that this text ranges in size from 12.5 points, which is a 1/2 inch tall, on up to 50 points, which is 2 inches tall, and we're currently working at a scale of 1 to 4, just so you know. So if we select all of this text and kern it using the proportionate spacing, you can see that everything looks pretty good, pretty even for all the text sizes. You'll notice that on the small text here, the 1/2 inch tall text, that there's proportionately more space between the characters than there is on these larger characters. For example, if we were to take this, move it over, change it to red, match our point size to 50, overlay it, you can see that the text that started out as 1/2 inch tall, if we bring it up to the same point size as the text that started out as 2 inches tall, there's going to be more space in between those characters than there is in between the characters that started out larger. That is because 1/2 inch tall text still needs to maintain the 1/8 inch minimum between each of the characters. So if we grab a little measuring tool from down here, 1/8 inch, and we check out the space in between each of these characters, you'll see that it still complies with that 1/8 inch minimum. So that all looks good. And if we check out the larger text, you can see that there is significantly more than 1/8 inch spacing between each of the letters. That's because it is set on proportionate spacing. So if we were to kern just that set of characters by itself, that the measurement it's going to use is 0.3759 for the spacing in between. If we were to release that proportionate spacing and allow for manual adjustment of that spacing, we could set it to 1/8 inch, 0.125, and do it again. You'll see that the text really looks pretty tight. So yes, it is compliant with the 1/8 inch minimum, but it really doesn't look good. It looks like the text is way too tight in relation to the height of the characters. So it's most often best to leave that as proportionate and just let it do its thing. You can make these slight adjustments to tight, comfy, and loose to see what kind of difference that will make. Tight, comfy, loose. Or you can go ahead and set this to a minimum amount, for example, of just 0. It'll still keep it at just above 0 because you don't want any of the characters to overlap. If we were to bump those just one step closer together, then the characters will overlap, and that's what we're trying to avoid. There's another setting here in the macro to handle non-alphanumeric characters like these hyphens, slashes, plus, punctuation that you might have anywhere in the line of text. It will allow for a little bit of extra room around those characters so that they don't get tucked in too tightly to the characters next to them. If we disengage that and see what it does, you can see that some of these characters really get in pretty tightly to the space of some of the characters that are next to them. Re-engaging that setting puts in a little bit more space so that they don't get too close to each other. It keeps some extra space between them. Depending on the different font style that you're using, you may have to experiment with this fine-tuning adjustment to achieve the proper kerning that you're looking for. So for example, if we select all of this text here and kern it using the default settings, that's the spacing we end up with. But if we check out this set of characters right here, we can see that some of these are a little bit too close together, so that there's not quite 1/8 inch in between those characters. See that right there? Not quite 1/8. So if we try another fine-tuning setting and kern that again, we see that it just added a little bit more room here in between these two characters. Still not quite enough. So let's try the next setting out. And that looks good. Now for a couple of real-world examples. Say if you had this page of signs all laid out that you needed to perform kerning really quickly on all of the sign text, you could just grab everything within the sign shapes and kern. It will process all of the text, making sure that there is the 1/8 inch minimum in between all of those characters. So everything that you check will have 1/8 inch between everything that you see. That was pretty darn quick. Much more quick than having to do it manually. Now this macro is going to perform its kerning strictly by the numbers. It's not going to take into consideration the overall look of the words after it gets done doing its kerning. It looks like these two letters here, possibly these two here, are a little bit tight visually, so you may want to go in afterwards and just add a little bit of space to account for that, so that you have a good overall look to the finished words after it gets done doing its thing. Now here's another page of example signs that need to be kerned with both tactile text that is going to be printed with raised lettering, and then this text down here, which does not need to be tactile text, so that's just going to be flat printed at 1/2 inch tall, but we still want to do our ADA kerning on that as well. So we can select all of our signs and text, kern those up. And there's our finished signs. Now for our last example, let's do something a little bit different. Say if the designer had in mind to allow for a little bit of extra spacing in between each of the characters. They wanted a little bit more airy look to their sign text, and that's what they were hoping for. So if we want to maintain that, we have to do something a little bit different to our settings. Let's make a copy of our text, copy, paste, change the color, and see what it looks like if we go to kern that. It's going to pull it in quite a bit, and we don't want that. We want to try to maintain what the designer had in mind. So let's disengage the proportionate spacing and bump this out a little bit. See where that lands us. Getting closer. Let's try 2 steps. That looks pretty good. Let's try using this. Looks pretty darn good. That's pretty close. We could bump it down to the previous setting if we wanted to. Either one of those would look good. That's a very small difference between those two. Let's stay with that one. Delete our copy. Go back out to all of our signs, select them all. Kern using this setting. We'll see that it's going to apply that same loose kerning style to all of the letters to end up with a final look that is just what the designer had in mind. That looks great. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you are interested in purchasing this macro, please check out the details in the description below. Thank you and God bless.